"They ripped my dress! Help me!" whispered the black waitress to the Hell's Angel leader. It was supposed to be just another quiet night at the diner, until a group of bikers turned cruel. Cornered, terrified, and humiliated, the waitress thought no one would help her, until the most dangerous man in town stepped out of the shadows. But when the feared biker leader defends her, instead of joining in, the whole town's story flips upside down. Who is this man she was told to fear? And why does he seem to know her late father's name? As rumors spread, her courage sparks something no one expected: a buried past, a second chance, and a fight between vengeance and redemption. One whispered plea for help will test everything they believe about mercy, loyalty, and grace. Can the man once known for destruction become her greatest protector, or will his past destroy them both? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The fluorescent lights of Teddy's diner buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow across the worn linoleum countertops. Amara Brown's fingers moved mechanically over the surface with a damp cloth, trying to scrub away the stubborn coffee stains that had accumulated during the evening rush. Her feet throbbed in her sensible white shoes, a reminder of the 8 hours she'd already spent on them. "Jesus loves me, this I know," she hummed softly, the familiar gospel tune helping to keep her spirit lifted despite her exhaustion. The old song reminded her of Sunday mornings with her father before he passed, his deep voice filling their tiny kitchen as he made breakfast. The clock on the wall read 12:35 in the morning. Only 25 minutes left until closing time. The diner was almost empty now, except for a group of bikers occupying the corner booth. Their leather vests bore patches she tried not to look at too closely, their voices growing increasingly boisterous with each round of beer. The clink of bottles and burst of rough laughter made her shoulders tense. She'd seen their type before. Weekend warriors who thought a motorcycle and a bad attitude made them tough. Usually they weren't too much trouble, but something about their energy tonight felt different. Wrong. "Hey, sweetheart," one of them called out, his words slightly slurred. "How about another round?" Amara straightened her spine, keeping her voice steady and professional. "I'm sorry, gentlemen, but we're closing soon. I'll need to bring you your check." "Aw, come on now," another one drawled, pushing back from the table. "Night's still young. Don't be like that." She reached for the coffee pot, giving her trembling hand something to do. "It's policy. We close at 1 o'clock sharp." The first man stood up, weaving slightly as he approached the counter. He was tall, with a scraggly beard and bloodshot eyes. "Policies are made to be broken. Ain't they, boys?" His friends laughed, the sound echoing off the diner's windows. Amara's heart began to pound, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd learned long ago that showing fear only made situations like this worse. "I need to ask you all to leave now," she said firmly, though her voice wasn't as strong as she would have liked. "Please." Instead of complying, they spread out, effectively blocking the path to the front door. The scraggly bearded one leaned across the counter, close enough that she could smell the beer on his breath. "Maybe we don't want to leave just yet. Maybe we're enjoying the view." Amara took a step back, bumping into the coffee maker. "Sir, please don't make this difficult." "Oh, we're being difficult now?" He reached across the counter suddenly, his thick fingers catching the sleeve of her pale blue uniform. She tried to pull away, but the fabric caught and tore with a sharp ripping sound that seemed to fill the entire diner. Panic surged through her chest. Without thinking, Amara turned and fled through the kitchen, pushing through the back door into the alley behind the diner. The cool night air hit her face as she stumbled out, her heart hammering against her ribs. The tear in her sleeve exposed her shoulder, and she clutched at the fabric, trying to hold it together. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. She couldn't afford to break down now. That's when she saw him. A massive shadow detached itself from the darkness near the dumpster. A tall, broad-shouldered figure she recognized immediately. Everyone in town knew who Dalton Reaper Briggs was, even if they pretended not to notice when he passed by. The leader of the local Hell's Angels chapter was a legend, a man whose name was whispered with equal parts fear and respect. He stood there silently, his steel-blue eyes taking in her disheveled appearance and frightened face. The streetlight caught the silver in his beard and the edges of the patches on his worn leather vest. Unlike the men inside, there was nothing unsteady or uncertain about his presence. He was solid as stone, radiating a quiet kind of danger that made the air feel heavy. "They ripped my dress," Amara whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the nearby transformer. "Help me." For a long moment, Reaper said nothing. Then his eyes narrowed, focusing on the torn sleeve of her uniform. Without a word, he moved past her, his boots scraping against the asphalt as he strode toward the back door of the diner. Amara pressed herself against the brick wall, watching as he disappeared inside. Within seconds, she heard his voice, deep and thunderous, roaring at the men who had harassed her. The words were muffled through the door, but their tone left no room for argument. Moments later, the group of bikers burst out the front door of the diner, practically falling over themselves in their haste to get to their motorcycles. The sound of engines revving filled the night air as they peeled out of the parking lot. Reaper emerged from the back door, his face set in lines of quiet fury. Without speaking, he shrugged out of his leather jacket, the one that marked him as president of the club, and held it out to her. The unexpected gesture made Amara's breath catch in her throat. Her fingers trembled as she took the jacket, sliding it over her shoulders. It was heavy and warm, smelling of leather and motor oil. The sleeves fell past her hands, but it covered her torn uniform completely. "Thank you," she managed to say, but Reaper had already turned away, scanning the darkness of the alley with watchful eyes. "Where do you live?" His voice was gravelly, like stones grinding together. 3 blocks east," she answered softly. "The apartment's above the laundromat." He nodded once and began walking, clearly expecting her to follow. Amara fell into step beside him, though she had to take 2 steps for every one of his long strides. The streets were empty at this hour, the only sound their footsteps and the steady buzz of the streetlights overhead. They walked in complete silence, but Amara felt safer than she had all night. There was something solid and dependable about Reaper's presence, despite, or perhaps because of, his fearsome reputation. When they reached her building, she started to slip off his jacket, but he held up one hand to stop her. "Keep it," he rumbled. "Return it when you can." "Thank you," she said again, meaning it for more than just the jacket. "I don't know what would have happened if—" He cut her off with a single shake of his head, his expression unreadable in the shadows. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, his figure slowly dissolving into the darkness of the street. Amara stood there for a long moment, watching him go, the heavy leather jacket still warm around her shoulders. Her hands were steady now as she reached for her keys, no longer shaking with fear. Tomorrow she would worry about her torn uniform and filing a report about the incident. But for now, she just felt grateful for the unexpected protection of a man she'd been taught to fear. The streetlights continued their steady hum as she climbed the stairs to her apartment, carrying with her the weight of an evening that had started with terror but ended with a strange kind of grace. Sometimes, she thought, help comes from the most unexpected places, wearing the face of someone society had labeled dangerous. The morning sun filtered weakly through the thin curtains of Amara's small apartment, casting pale stripes across her tired face. She hadn't slept well, her mind replaying the events of the previous night like a stuck record. The weight of Reaper's leather jacket still seemed to press against her shoulders, though it now hung carefully over the back of her kitchen chair. "Mom, are you okay?" Caleb's voice startled her from her thoughts. Her 9-year-old son stood in the doorway of her bedroom, already dressed for school in his favorite blue t-shirt and worn jeans. His dark eyes, so much like his grandfather's, held a worry that no child his age should have to carry. Amara quickly adjusted her long-sleeved shirt, making sure it covered the purple marks blooming on her arm where the biker had grabbed her. "I'm fine, sweetheart," she said, forcing brightness into her voice. "Just a long night at work." She got up, wincing slightly as her muscles protested, and headed to the kitchen. Caleb followed, his backpack dragging on the floor behind him. "I heard you come in late," he said, watching as she pulled out bread and peanut butter. "Later than usual." "Just had some extra cleaning to do," Amara lied, hating the taste of dishonesty, but knowing it was better than burdening her son with the truth. She focused on making his lunch, carefully spreading peanut butter and strawberry jam on wheat bread, the way he liked it, with the crusts left on. "Is that someone's jacket?" Caleb asked, pointing to the leather vest draped over the chair. "Just borrowed it," she said quickly, tucking an apple and a small bag of chips into his lunch bag. "Here you go, baby. Don't forget your math homework." Caleb hugged her tightly before heading out, and Amara held him a moment longer than usual, drawing strength from his innocent embrace. Once he was gone, she allowed herself to sink into a kitchen chair, her hands trembling slightly as she sipped her coffee. The morning shift at Teddy's diner started at 10 o'clock, but the gossip had beaten her there by hours. She could feel it in the way conversations hushed when she walked through the door, in the sidelong glances from her co-workers as she tied on a fresh apron over her spare uniform. "Heard Reaper walked you home last night," Jenny, another waitress, whispered as they refilled sugar dispensers together. Her eyes were wide with curiosity and something like fear. "Is it true?" Before Amara could answer, the bell above the door chimed. Sheriff Donnelly walked in, his weathered face set in its usual stern lines. He settled himself at the counter, right in Amara's section, and she knew this wasn't a casual visit for coffee. "Morning, Sheriff," she said, placing a menu in front of him, though they both knew he always ordered the same thing: black coffee and wheat toast. "Ms. Brown," he nodded, his pale blue eyes studying her face. "Heard there was some trouble here last night." Amara poured his coffee without being asked. "Nothing I couldn't handle." "That's so." His tone was careful, measured. "Because I also heard Dalton Briggs was involved." "He helped me with some unruly customers," she said simply, keeping her voice steady. "That's all." The sheriff's mustache twitched. "Ms. Brown, I knew your father. He was a good man. I'd hate to see his daughter mixing with the wrong sort." The mention of her father stung, but Amara lifted her chin. "The wrong sort, Sheriff? The man helped me when I needed it. Isn't that what matters?" Donnelly's expression darkened. "You don't know Briggs like I do. He's got a past that would curl your hair." The morning rush picked up then, saving Amara from having to respond. She threw herself into work, trying to ignore the whispers that followed her around the diner like persistent shadows. It was nearly closing time when Pete Jenkins came in. The old mechanic was a fixture in town, his coveralls perpetually stained with grease, his kind face mapped with wrinkles. He waited until she had a break before motioning her over to his corner booth. "Your daddy would have been proud of you," he said, without preamble, his voice gruff but gentle. Working hard, raising that boy right?" Amara smiled, though her heart ached at the mention of her father. "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins." "Pete," he corrected, then hesitated. "Listen, about last night. About Reaper." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "He and your dad, they rode together back in their army days. Vietnam was hell, but those two, they looked out for each other." The world seemed to tilt slightly on its axis. "What?" Pete nodded slowly. "Your daddy saved Reaper's life more than once over there, and Reaper, well, he tried to return the favor when your dad got sick. Visited him every day in the VA hospital, right up until the end." Amara's legs felt weak. She sank into the booth across from Pete, her mind racing. "I never knew." "There's a lot of things about Reaper most folks don't know," Pete said quietly. "He's had a rough road, made some bad choices after your daddy passed, but he's still got that old code of honor, still remembers his brothers." When Amara got home that night, she went straight to the old shoebox in her closet where she kept her father's things. There, among the medals and letters, was a faded photograph she'd never paid much attention to before. It showed her father in his army days, arm thrown around the shoulders of a younger man with familiar steel blue eyes. Both were smiling, their faces untouched by the shadows that would come later. Across town, in a cluttered garage apartment above his motorcycle repair shop, Reaper sat alone in his worn leather chair. In his weathered hands, he held a tarnished silver cross on a chain, identical to the one he'd noticed around Amara's neck the night before. His mind drifted back 20 years to a hospital room where his best friend had pressed the necklace into his hand. "Sergeant Samuel Brown," he whispered into the darkness, the name emerging from the locked box of memories he'd kept buried for so long. His calloused fingers traced the worn edges of the cross, and for the first time in years, his hard features softened with something that looked almost like peace. The world seemed smaller somehow, the threads of past and present weaving together in ways he'd never expected. In helping Amara, he'd kept a promise he'd made long ago, though he hadn't known it at the time. The thought settled in his chest like a warm weight, familiar and strange all at once. The morning crowd at Teddy's diner had thinned to a trickle. Amara watched as another regular customer glanced her way, then chose a booth in Sally's section instead. Her heart sank a little deeper. The whispers followed her like persistent shadows. Imagine getting mixed up with that Reaper character. Wonder what kind of example she's setting for that boy of hers. Always seemed like such a nice girl, too. Amara kept her head high, though each word stung like tiny paper cuts. She focused on wiping down tables that were already clean, straightening sugar packets that didn't need straightening. The diner's ancient ceiling fan squeaked overhead, and somewhere in the kitchen, a pot clattered against the sink. "Sugar, you want me to take table 6? Sally asked, her lined face creased with concern. "Those men in there, they're some of Mike Peterson's crowd, known to be difficult." "I can handle it," Amara said firmly, though her hands trembled slightly as she filled their coffee cups. The men barely looked at her, speaking in low voices that died away when she approached. Their tips, when they finally left, were coins tossed carelessly onto sticky tabletops. By closing time, her feet ached and her spirit felt bruised. The street outside was quiet except for the occasional passing car, their headlights sweeping across the darkened storefront windows. Amara counted her meager tips, trying not to think about the electric bill waiting at home. The walk home was lonely under the orange glow of streetlights. Moths danced around the lamps, casting fleeting shadows on the cracked sidewalk. Amara hugged her jacket closer, thinking of Caleb waiting at Mrs. Martinez's house next door. The babysitter had been kind enough to watch him late again, understanding about Amara's long hours. As she approached her small house, something caught her eye. There, on the worn wooden porch, sat a brown paper bag. Her heart skipped. Was it safe? In this neighborhood, you could never be too careful. But when she carefully peeked inside, her breath caught. The bag was filled with groceries. Fresh bread, milk, eggs, and even some of those chocolate chip cookies Caleb loved so much. Beneath it all lay her diner name tag, the pin perfectly repaired, the scratched surface gleaming as if new. A folded piece of paper rested on top. With trembling fingers, Amara opened the note. The handwriting was thick and decisive, almost stern in its simplicity. For Caleb, you don't owe me anything. She pressed her hand to her mouth, tears welling up despite her best efforts to hold them back. The kindness of it, unexpected, unasked for, broke through every wall she'd built to stay strong. The next morning, after getting Caleb off to school, Amara found herself standing outside Reaper's auto shop. The building was weathered but well-maintained, with a hand-painted sign and clean windows. The sound of metal on metal rang from inside. Her heart pounded as she pushed open the door, a small bell announcing her presence. The shop smelled of oil and leather and something metallic. Reaper emerged from behind a lifted motorcycle, wiping his hands on a red shop rag. "Mr. Briggs," she started, then corrected herself. "Reaper, I wanted to thank you for the groceries and fixing my name tag." He didn't look up from his hands. "Told you. You don't owe me anything." "I know, but..." She took a deep breath. It meant a lot, to both of us. He finally met her eyes, and something in his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Your dad," he said gruffly, "patched me up more times than I can count in that jungle. Kept me alive when others might have left me for dead." He moved to a workbench, picking up a wrench only to set it down again. "Noticed your diner's got a leak. Roof needs work." "We can't afford," Amara began. "Didn't ask about money," he cut her off, but gently. "Consider it payback. Long overdue." That weekend, the sound of hammering drew curious onlookers to Teddy's diner. Reaper worked steadily on the roof, his movements sure and practiced. Amara brought him sweet tea in mason jars, their conversations awkward but warming with each trip up the ladder. "My daddy used to drink it just like this," she said, watching him take a long swallow. "2 sugars, splash of lemon." Sam had a sweet tooth, Reaper agreed, then seemed surprised at himself for sharing the memory. "Always carrying hard candies in his pocket. Said sugar kept the darkness away." Around noon, Caleb appeared with his sketchbook clutched to his chest. He'd been watching Reaper work all morning from a safe distance, fascinated by the man's sure movements and quiet strength. "Sir?" Caleb's voice was barely above a whisper. I made this for you." Reaper set down his hammer, carefully wiping his hands before accepting the offered paper. It was a detailed drawing of a motorcycle, rendered with a child's loving attention to detail. But this bike had something special, a pair of angel wings sprouting from its sides, drawn in silver crayon. The laugh that burst from Reaper startled them all, a deep, rusty sound, as if long unused. "Angel wings on a Harley," he said, shaking his head. "Your daddy would have loved that kid." Caleb beamed, standing a little straighter. "Really?" "Really." Reaper carefully folded the drawing and tucked it into his shirt pocket, right over his heart. By sunset, the new tin roof gleamed in the fading light. Reaper packed his tools methodically, each item finding its proper place in his worn leather bag. But as he worked, Amara noticed movement across the street. A group of townspeople had gathered, watching. She recognized the bank manager, the hardware store owner, even Pastor Matthews's wife. Their expressions ranged from disapproval to outright hostility. One woman whispered behind her hand to another, both shaking their heads. The weight of their judgment settled like a cold stone in Amara's stomach. She'd known there would be talk, but seeing it so openly displayed made her hands shake as she gathered the empty tea glasses. Reaper noticed, too. She could tell by the way his shoulders tensed. But he continued his work without comment, his movements perhaps a bit more deliberate, a bit more defiant. The morning sun couldn't pierce the cloud of shame that hung over Amara as she walked to work 3 days later. Her shoes scraped against the sidewalk, each step heavy with the weight of whispers that followed her through town. But nothing prepared her for what she found at the diner's back wall. The words, "Angel's Whore," glared back at her in angry red spray paint, still wet and dripping like blood. Her stomach lurched as she stared at the cruel letters, each one a slap to her face. The paint had run down the wall in thin rivulets, staining the concrete below. Amara's hands trembled as she grabbed the cleaning supplies from the storage closet. She wouldn't let anyone else see this, couldn't bear the thought of more whispers, more judgment. The rough brick scraped her knuckles raw as she scrubbed, tears mixing with soapy water. "That ain't coming off with just soap." She jumped at Reaper's voice behind her. He stood there holding a bucket of paint thinner and a wire brush, his face hard as granite but his eyes gentle. "You shouldn't have to see this," Amara whispered, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Neither should you." He set down the bucket and rolled up his sleeves. Without another word, he dipped the wire brush in the paint thinner and began working at the letters. They cleaned together in silence, the only sound the scratch of bristles against brick. Their reflections wavered in the wet metal of the bucket, her small frame next to his larger one, working in quiet harmony. The morning sun crept higher as they scrubbed, warming their backs and slowly drying the clean patches of wall. When the last trace of red had finally faded, Amara straightened up, her back aching. "Thank you," she said softly. "You didn't have to do this." Reaper grunted, wiping his hands on a rag. "Yes, I did." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither dared explore. Amara took a deep breath, gathering her courage. Would you like to come to dinner tonight? As thanks?" He looked startled, then wary. "People are talking enough already." "Let them talk." The words came out fiercer than she intended. "You've shown more kindness to me and Caleb than most of those gossips ever have." A long moment passed before he nodded once, sharp and decisive. That evening, Amara's small kitchen filled with unfamiliar but welcome sounds, Caleb's excited chatter, the clink of plates, and Reaper's occasional low rumble of response. He sat somewhat stiffly at first, as if unsure of his place in this warm domestic scene. And then in science class, Caleb bubbled, barely touching his meatloaf. "We learned about motorcycles." "Well, not really, but we learned about engines and combustion, and I knew some of it because of the pictures in your shop window." "That so?" Reaper's voice was gruff but gentle. "What else you learn?" While Caleb launched into an enthusiastic explanation of internal combustion, Reaper's sharp eyes noticed the kitchen cabinet hanging crooked on its hinge. Without comment, he stood and retrieved a small tool kit from his jacket pocket. "Oh, you don't have to," Amara started. "Been catching my eye all evening," he said simply, already working on the hinge. Watching him fix the cabinet while Caleb peppered him with questions about engines, Amara felt something warm and dangerous unfurl in her chest. This felt right in a way that scared her, like a glimpse of something she couldn't let herself want. The peaceful moment shattered at the sound of motorcycles roaring up outside. Reaper was on his feet instantly, his whole body tensing like a coiled spring. "Stay inside," he ordered, his voice hard. "Lock the door behind me." Through the window, Amara watched as Reaper strode out to meet two bikers, Slim and Dutch. She recognized them from that night at the diner. Their bikes growled menacingly in the gathering dusk. "Well, ain't this sweet?" Slim's voice carried clearly through the glass. "The big bad Reaper, playing house with his little waitress and her kid? Playing daddy to replace the one you got killed?" Reaper's fist connected with Slim's jaw before the last word was fully out of his mouth. The smaller man sprawled backwards, blood spraying from his split lip. "You listen good." Reaper's voice was low and deadly. "That woman and her boy are off limits. You come near them again, you'll wish it was just a punch." Dutch helped Slim to his feet, both men glaring hatred at their former leader. "Gang won't like this, Reaper," Dutch warned. "Can't protect your little family and stay neutral forever." "Then I ain't neutral anymore." The words fell like stones in the growing darkness. Slim spat blood onto the ground. "You're gonna regret this, old man. That's a promise." Thunder rolled across the hills as they roared away, the sound almost drowning out Caleb's frightened voice behind her. "Mom, are they gonna hurt us?" Amara pulled him close, feeling his small body trembling against her. Through the window, she watched Reaper standing in her yard, his massive frame silhouetted against the stormy sky. Her heart twisted with a complex mixture of fear and gratitude. Fear for what his protection might cost him, gratitude that he was willing to pay that price. The thunder growled again, closer now, as Reaper turned back toward the house. His face in the porch light was lined with worry, but his eyes, when they met hers, were filled with unwavering resolve. Whatever storm was coming, he had chosen his side. The Sunday morning dawned gray and heavy, matching Reaper's mood as he flexed his bruised knuckles. Sleep had been elusive, his mind replaying the confrontation over and over. The familiar weight of violence sat uncomfortably in his chest now, like an old coat that no longer fit right. He found himself driving his motorcycle past the First Baptist Church, slowing as the bells chimed for morning service. Before he could think better of it, he parked in the shadows of a large oak tree and slipped inside, choosing a back pew where the dim light wouldn't betray his presence. Pastor Miller's gentle voice filled the sanctuary, speaking of grace and new beginnings. "God's forgiveness," he said, "isn't earned. It's given freely to those who seek it with an honest heart." Reaper's calloused fingers traced the worn leather of his Bible, unopened for years. The pastor's words seemed meant just for him. Sometimes the hardest person to forgive is yourself. But remember, every saint has a past, and every sinner has a future. Across town, Amara stood in her small kitchen, watching Caleb push his breakfast around his plate. Dark circles under his eyes told her he hadn't slept well either. "Mom?" His voice was small. "Those men last night, they were really mad at Mr. Reaper." Amara's heart clenched. She sat down beside him, smoothing his unruly hair. "Yes, they were, but Mr. Reaper was protecting us." "Because he knew Dad?" "That's part of it." She chose her words carefully. "Sometimes people can surprise us with their goodness, even when others don't see it." But doubt gnawed at her as she walked to work, her steps heavy with responsibility. Was she being naive? Selfish? The thought of putting Caleb in danger made her sick to her stomach. The morning rush at Teddy's diner was unusually quiet. Regular customers who normally sat in her section chose other tables, their whispered conversations falling silent when she passed. By mid-morning, her tip jar held mostly small change. "Amara?" Her boss, Ted, called her into his office during the lull between breakfast and lunch. His round face was creased with concern. "We need to talk." She sat in the worn chair across from his desk, smoothing her apron with trembling hands. "You're one of my best waitresses," he began. "Been here, 6 years now?" 7, she corrected softly. 7. He nodded. Never had a complaint until now. But folks are talking. Some won't sit in your section. Others say they won't come in at all if... He trailed off, uncomfortable. If Reaper keeps coming around, she finished for him. This town forgets quick, Ted said, leaning back in his chair. But not about people like him. Man's got a reputation, Amara. Whether it's deserved or not doesn't matter. Perception is reality in a small town. She thought about Reaper fixing her cabinet, listening to Caleb's excited chatter about science class. People can change, she said quietly. Ted's expression was kind, but firm. Maybe so, but you've got Caleb to think about. Just be careful, okay? That evening. After tucking Caleb into bed, Amara knelt beside her own bed like she hadn't done since she was a girl. Lord, she whispered, am I wrong? Am I seeing something in him that isn't there? Or are you working through this somehow? She pressed her forehead against clasped hands. Please, show me the way. The answer didn't come in words or signs, but in the quiet certainty that grew in her heart through the night. The next morning she woke early and baked an apple pie, her mother's recipe, the one that always made everything feel a little more hopeful. Reaper's auto shop was quiet when she arrived, the large garage doors open to the morning air. She found him bent over a motorcycle engine, his hands black with grease. Breakfast delivery, she called softly. He straightened up, surprise flickering across his weathered features. You didn't have to. I wanted to. She set the pie on his workbench. Got coffee? They sat on old shop stools, eating pie straight from the tin with forks she'd brought from home. The morning sun streamed through the garage doors, catching the silver in his hair. About last night, he began. Thank you, she cut in, for standing up for us. He shook his head. Brought trouble to your door instead. Trouble seems to find me anyway. She smiled slightly. At least this time it's for something worthwhile. That made him laugh, a short, rusty sound, like he'd forgotten how. It made him look younger, more like the man in her father's old photograph. They talked about small things then. The weather, a funny story about Caleb's science project, the old Harley he was restoring. But underneath ran a current of something deeper, until finally he set down his fork with a sigh. Been trying to get out? He said quietly. The gang life. Been trying for years, really. Just... He stared at his grease-stained hands. Don't know how anymore. Feel like I'm too far gone. Amara reached across the workbench, her clean hand covering his stained one. Even broken roads can lead home, she said softly. If you let faith drive. His eyes met hers, startled by the touch, by the words, by the simple acceptance in her face. Would you pray with me? She asked. For a long moment he didn't move. Then, slowly, like rusty hinges creaking open, he bowed his head. Amara's voice filled the quiet shop. Lord, thank you for this food, for this morning, for new chances. Guide us on your path, even when we can't see the way clear. Amen. Amen, Reaper echoed, and the word felt strange and familiar all at once on his tongue, like coming home after a very long time away. The summer heat rolled into town like a warm blanket, bringing with it the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming magnolias. At Teddy's diner, Amara watched through the window as Reaper worked on the wooden fence that lined the parking lot, his movements steady and purposeful in the morning sun. His leather jacket was draped over a nearby post, replaced by a plain, white t-shirt that showed years of hard living in every muscle. Look, Mom, Caleb called from where he sat, cross-legged on the gravel, carefully arranging Reaper's tools. He's teaching me about the different wrenches. Amara smiled, carrying out a pitcher of fresh lemonade. The ice clinked against the glass as she set it down on one of the outdoor tables. "You boys look like you could use a break." Reaper straightened up, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "Much obliged," he said, his voice gravelly but warm. He poured a glass for Caleb first, then himself. "Can we show Mom what you taught me?" Caleb asked eagerly, bouncing on his toes. Reaper nodded, leading them to where his motorcycle was parked. With patient guidance, he helped Caleb demonstrate how to check tire pressure and change a flat. Amara watched her son's face light up with pride as he explained each step. "You never know when you might need to help someone stranded on the road," Reaper said, ruffling Caleb's hair. "Your daddy would have wanted you to know these things." The mention of her father made Amara's heart squeeze, but not painfully. There was something healing in the way Reaper shared these small pieces of the man she'd lost too young. As the days passed, small changes began to ripple through the town. Mrs. Henderson, who'd been coming to the diner for 20 years, left an extra $5 with her usual tip. "For that sweet boy of yours," she said with a wink. The following Sunday, 3 ladies from the Baptist church dropped off 2 boxes of barely worn clothes for Caleb. "They're from my grandson," Mrs. Patterson explained, her eyes kind. "He outgrew them so fast, seems ashamed to waste good clothes." Amara recognized the gesture for what it was, an olive branch, a sign that perhaps the town's judgment was softening. She caught glimpses of it in other ways, too. The way people stopped whispering when she passed, how some even nodded hello to Reaper when he came by the diner. But peace, like spring flowers, can be fragile. It happened on a Tuesday night, just after closing. The crash of breaking glass shattered the quiet, followed by the roar of motorcycles. Amara rushed from the kitchen to find the front window of the diner in pieces, glittering like deadly stars across the checkered floor. In the center lay a brick with a single word scrawled across it in red paint. "Traitor." Sheriff Donnelly arrived within minutes, his cruiser's lights painting the scene in alternating red and blue. He found Reaper already there, carefully sweeping up glass while Amara called the insurance company. "Convenient timing," Donnelly remarked, eyeing Reaper suspiciously. "You just happened to be nearby?" "I was closing up the shop," Reaper replied evenly. "Heard the crash." "And you didn't see who did it?" "No, sir, but I have my suspicions." The sheriff's mouth tightened. "Yeah, I bet you do. Strange how trouble seems to follow you around, Briggs." "Sheriff," Amara interrupted, her voice firm. "He was helping, not causing trouble." Donnelly turned to her, his expression softening slightly. "Ms. Brown, I know you want to see the best in people, but men like this—" "Men like what exactly?" she challenged, drawing herself up. "Men who fix fences for free? Who teach little boys about tools and tires? Who protect waitresses from drunk customers?" The sheriff removed his hat, running a hand through his graying hair. "I've got a job to do, ma'am, and that job is keeping this town safe." "Then maybe start by finding who really did this," she suggested quietly. After Donnelly left, Amara noticed Reaper's hand, angry and red where he'd cut it on the glass. Without a word, she led him back to her house, Caleb trailing behind with worried eyes. In her small living room, lit only by a single lamp, she cleaned and bandaged his hand. The ice pack she held against it made him wince, but he didn't pull away. "I know it was slim and Dutch," he said finally, breaking the silence. "This is how it starts. They're sending a message." "To you?" "To anyone who tries to leave." He stared at his bandaged hand. "Did time in Huntsville State Prison 15 years ago. Armed robbery gone wrong. Should have been longer, but I cut a deal." His voice grew distant. "Your father. He pulled me out of a hot zone once in Nam. Took a bullet meant for me. I never paid that debt." Amara's hands stilled on the bandage. "Is that why you help us? Guilt?" At first, maybe. He met her eyes. Not anymore. She sat back, studying his weathered face in the soft lamplight. You can't undo the past, Dalton, she said gently. But you can build something better. Outside, in the darkness beyond the window's warm glow, Dutch sat on his idling motorcycle. The ember of his cigarette glowed orange as he took a long drag, watching the shadows move behind the curtains. Without a sound, he kicked his bike into gear and disappeared into the night, leaving only tire tracks in the gravel and the fading scent of smoke. The crickets sang their evening song, a reminder that even in moments of darkness, life continues its gentle rhythm. Inside, Amara made coffee while Caleb showed Reaper his science homework, the three of them finding comfort in these small, ordinary moments that somehow felt extraordinary. The Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, with dew sparkling on the grass like scattered diamonds. Amara stood in front of her mirror, smoothing her best floral dress and checking that her makeup covered the fading worry lines around her eyes. In the kitchen, Caleb already sat at the table in his pressed khakis and button-down shirt, practically vibrating with excitement. "Do you think Mr. Reaper will really come?" he asked, picking at his toast. Amara smiled, remembering how nervous Reaper had seemed when she invited him after dinner last Thursday. "He promised he would, didn't he?" They found him waiting outside First Baptist Church, standing, awkwardly in clean jeans and a pressed white shirt that looked newly bought. His silver hair was neatly combed, and he'd trimmed his beard. The sight of him trying so hard made Amara's heart squeeze. "You clean up nice," she said softly, straightening his collar. Reaper cleared his throat. "Been a while since I've done this." As they approached the church steps, conversations died away. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the gathering crowd like wind through tall grass. Amara felt Reaper stiffen beside her, but before anyone could react, Pastor Miller strode down the steps with his hand extended. "Welcome, brother," he said warmly, giving Reaper's hand a firm shake. "We're glad you've joined us today." The pastor's greeting seemed to break some of the tension. People began filing into the church, though many cast backward glances at the unlikely trio making their way up the aisle. Reaper sat stiffly in the pew beside Amara, his shoulders so rigid they could have been carved from stone. When the music started, she gently pressed a hymnal into his calloused hands. His fingers trembled slightly as he gripped it. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound," the congregation began to sing. Reaper didn't join in, but Amara noticed his thumb slowly stroking the worn leather cover of the hymnal, as if touching something precious and half-forgotten. Pastor Miller's sermon was about second chances, about how God's love could reach into the darkest corners of human hearts. Amara wondered if he'd chosen the topic deliberately. She snuck glances at Reaper throughout the service, watching his face as he listened intently, his jaw working sometimes as if holding back emotion. When the service ended, most people gave them a wide berth during the usual after-church socializing. But Caleb, either oblivious to or choosing to ignore the awkwardness, proudly dragged Reaper around to anyone who would listen. "This is Mr. Reaper," he announced to Mrs. Henderson, who clutched her purse a little tighter. "He fixed our roof and taught me how to change a tire. Did you know he can make any engine work just by listening to it?" Reaper's weathered face softened at the boy's enthusiasm. "Think you're giving me too much credit there, kid." Gradually, seeing Caleb's innocent acceptance and Reaper's gentle responses, people began to relax. A few of the men who'd had car trouble ventured closer to ask mechanical questions. Mrs. Patterson, who'd donated the clothes for Caleb, even invited them to the church cookout in the park that afternoon. "There's always plenty of food," she said, her eyes twinkling. "And Robert's bringing his famous barbecue." The cookout turned out to be exactly what they all needed. Under the warm afternoon sun, with the smell of grilled hamburgers and hot dogs filling the air, it was harder to maintain walls of suspicion. Reaper found himself drawn into a conversation about classic cars with some of the older men. He spoke quietly but knowledgeably, and soon, they were all laughing at his dry observations about modern vehicles. Amara watched from where she sat with some of the church ladies, her heart full. Caleb ran around with other kids, playing tag between the picnic tables. For a moment, it felt wonderfully normal. "He's not what I expected," admitted Betty Williams, following Amara's gaze to where Reaper was showing Caleb's friend Tommy how to properly flip a burger. "People rarely are, once you get to know them," Amara replied. The peaceful atmosphere shattered just as the sun began to set. First came the distant rumble, growing louder until it filled the park like thunder. A dozen motorcycles roared past, circling the park's perimeter like predators sizing up prey. Children stopped playing. Conversations died. Parents pulled their little ones closer. Slim led the pack, his face twisted with contempt. As they made another pass, he shouted over the engine noise, "You forgot who you are!" The words echoed across the suddenly silent park. Reaper stood very still, his face unreadable, but Amara saw his hands clench into fists at his sides. "Maybe we should head home," Pastor Miller suggested quietly to the gathering. "It's getting late anyway." People packed up quickly, casting nervous glances towards the road. The bikers had disappeared, but their message hung heavy in the cooling air. Reaper helped load chairs into trucks and fold tables, working methodically despite the tension evident in every line of his body. "I'm sorry," he said gruffly to Amara as they walked to their cars. "I shouldn't have come." "Don't," she touched his arm. "Today was beautiful. Don't let them take that away." But after dropping Amara and Caleb at home, Reaper drove to his garage with a heavy heart. He knew what he'd find before he even pulled up. Fresh red spray paint marked the rolling door. "Snitch," in letters that seemed to glow in his headlights. Inside, he stood for a long moment in the darkness. Then, moving with quiet purpose, he began to pack. Tools went into boxes, carefully wrapped. Old photos came down from the walls. A small box of medals and memories from his service days. A worn Bible his mother had given him years ago. He worked late into the night, sorting through decades of life in this place, deciding what was essential and what could be left behind. But he didn't call Amara, didn't tell her about the threat painted on his door or the slow, methodical packing. She'd only worry, and she'd had enough worry in her life. In the silence of his garage, surrounded by half-packed boxes and the ghosts of better days, Reaper closed his eyes and remembered the sound of hymns, the smell of barbecue, and the way Caleb's face lit up when he saw him. The memory ached like an old wound, sweet and painful all at once. The crickets sang outside, a peaceful chorus that seemed at odds with the tension in his heart. But he kept packing, knowing that trouble was coming, and determined to face it on his own terms. The summer heat pressed down like a heavy blanket as Amara walked to Reaper's garage, carrying a basket filled with sandwiches and fresh lemonade. Something felt different these past few days, a distance she couldn't quite name. The usually busy garage was quiet, except for the occasional clang of tools. She found him hunched over his workbench, sorting through old papers with an intensity that seemed out of place. "Brought you some lunch," she said, trying to keep her voice light. Reaper barely looked up. "Thanks. Just leave it there." "Everything okay?" She set the basket down, noticing boxes stacked in corners where tools used to be. Her heart sank as understanding dawned. "You're packing." He straightened slowly, his shoulders tight with tension. Might be time for me to move on. Find somewhere new. Because of what happened at the cookout? Because staying puts you and Caleb in danger. His voice was gruff, but she heard the pain beneath it. These men, my old crew, they don't forget, and they don't forgive. So you're just going to disappear? Anger crept into her voice. After everything? It's for the best. No. The word came out sharp and clear. Running away only lets the darkness win. Is that what you want to teach Caleb? That when things get hard, we give up? Reaper's jaw clenched. This isn't about giving up. It's about keeping you safe. Safe? She stepped closer. We were never safe, but we were learning to be brave together, to trust that good things can grow even in hard places. Before he could respond, excited footsteps pounded on the concrete outside. Caleb burst through the door, his face flushed with excitement. Mom! Reaper! Guess what? Despite the tension, Amara couldn't help smiling at her son's enthusiasm. What's got you so worked up? The church is doing something amazing. Caleb caught his breath. Pastor Miller announced it today. They're having a special baptism service down by the river this weekend, and then a charity motorcycle ride for veterans. His eyes shone as he turned to Reaper. You have to come, please. The simple plea hung in the air. Reaper's expression softened as he looked at the boy's hopeful face. After a long moment, he nodded slowly. All right, kid. I'll be there. Saturday dawned clear and bright. The riverbank buzzed with activity as people set up chairs and a small platform near the water's edge. American flags fluttered in the breeze, and the smell of coffee and donuts wafted from folding tables. Reaper arrived early, parking his motorcycle at the edge of the crowd. He stood apart, watching as more people gathered. Some nodded cautiously in his direction. A small change, but noticeable. Pastor Miller began the service with a prayer about new beginnings. Then, one by one, people stepped into the cool river water for baptism. Each emergence was met with applause and joy. When it was Caleb's turn, Amara's heart swelled with pride. Her son walked into the water with Pastor Miller, his face serious but peaceful. Do you accept Jesus Christ as your Savior? The pastor asked. I do, Caleb answered clearly. As he rose from the water, sunlight caught the droplets in his hair like a crown of diamonds. The crowd cheered, but Amara's eyes found Reaper. He stood straight and tall, emotion plain on his weathered face. Without hesitation, she walked to his side and faced the gathering. If God can forgive him, she said loudly, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd. So can we. The silence that followed was profound. Then, to everyone's amazement, tears began rolling down Reaper's cheeks, the first anyone had seen in decades. These weren't the quiet tears of joy from the baptisms, but deep, raw drops of released pain. Someone started clapping. Others joined in. The barrier between Reaper and the town seemed to crack and crumble in that moment, washed away like sins in the river. The afternoon turned into a celebration. Veterans shared stories, motorcycles gleamed in the sun, and children played tag between the bikes. Even Sheriff Donnelly stopped by to shake Reaper's hand. But the peace wouldn't last. That night, Reaper was reading in his small apartment above the garage when he smelled smoke. He looked out the window to see orange flames licking up the side of the building. The gang had finally made their move. "Scout!" he yelled for his old dog. The aging retriever was somewhere downstairs in the garage. He rushed down the stairs, smoke already thick in the air. The heat was intense, and he could hear the crackle of his tools and equipment burning. His motorcycle, his livelihood, all of it feeding the flames. But none of that mattered. "Scout!" he called again, pushing deeper into the inferno. He found the dog huddled under a workbench, whimpering. The smoke was overwhelming now. Reaper scooped up Scout, but as he turned toward the exit, a burning beam crashed down. He stumbled, choking on the toxic fumes. The world started to go dark at the edges. The last thing he saw was the flames consuming everything he owned, dancing like demons in the night. Then consciousness slipped away, and he collapsed to the floor with Scout still clutched in his arms as the fire raged around them. The garage, his home, his work, his fresh start, burned bright against the dark sky, a beacon of destruction that would bring the whole town running. But for now, Reaper lay still in the smoke and heat, time running out as the flames climbed higher. Amara heard the sirens first. She had been doing the dishes when the wail cut through the quiet night air. Something in her heart clenched tight. She grabbed her keys and Caleb, who was already in his pajamas. "Mom, what's wrong?" Caleb asked as they rushed to the car. "I don't know, honey, but we need to check on Reaper." They saw the orange glow in the sky before they reached the garage. Fire trucks were already there, their red lights painting everything in surreal flashes. Water arced through the air, hitting the burning building with a hiss of steam. "No, no, no," Amara whispered, her hands trembling on the steering wheel. She parked haphazardly and jumped out, Caleb right behind her. The heat hit them like a wall. Smoke rolled across the parking lot in thick waves. Firefighters in heavy gear moved with urgent purpose, dragging hoses and shouting commands. Then she saw him. "Reaper!" The scream tore from her throat. He lay crumpled near the doorway, Scout's limp form still cradled in his arms. 2 firefighters were rushing toward him. Amara tried to run forward, but strong hands held her back. "Ma'am, you can't go near there." "That's my friend!" she cried, struggling against the grip. "Please, is he alive?" They watched as the firefighters carefully lifted Reaper and Scout, carrying them away from the smoking wreckage. Paramedics swarmed in with oxygen masks and equipment. Amara clutched Caleb close, both of them trembling as they watched the emergency workers fight to save Reaper's life. "He's breathing," one paramedic called out. "But barely. We need to move now." The next hours passed in a blur of hospital corridors and worried waiting. Scout was taken to an emergency vet clinic, while Reaper was rushed into intensive care. Smoke inhalation, burns, trauma. The list seemed endless. For 3 days, Amara barely left his side. She called in sick to work, arranged for neighbors to watch Caleb, and kept her vigil. She held Reaper's rough hand through fever spikes and restless moments, whispering prayers and willing him to fight. The machines beeped steadily. Nurses came and went. Outside the window, life went on, but in this room, time seemed suspended. On the 3rd day, his fingers twitched in hers. Amara sat up straighter, watching his face intently. His eyes fluttered, then slowly opened, confused and clouded with pain. "You're safe now," she whispered, squeezing his hand gently. His voice came out as a harsh rasp. Why are you here?" "Because this is where I need to be." He turned his face away, shame evident in every line of his body. "Don't deserve your kindness. Never have." "That's not true." Amara's voice was firm but gentle. "My father believed in you once. He saw something good in you, something worth saving. And so do I." Before Reaper could respond, there was a knock at the door. Sheriff Donnelly stepped in, his face grave but not unkind. "How you feeling, Briggs?" he asked. "Like I got caught in a fire," Reaper answered dryly. The sheriff nodded. "We found evidence. Slim and Dutch's work, clear as day. Empty gas can with their prints. Witnesses saw their bikes." He pulled out a notepad. "Ready to press charges?" Reaper was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was tired but certain. "No." Let God handle them. Amara's eyes filled with tears as she smiled sadly. This was the man her father had known. Not the hardened biker, but someone who could choose mercy over vengeance, peace over revenge. Sheriff, Donnelly looked surprised, then thoughtful. Well, that's your choice, but they won't get away with it. Arson's a serious crime, whether you press charges or not. After the sheriff left, silence filled the room. Amara continued holding Reaper's hand, understanding that sometimes the hardest battles are fought in the quiet moments of choosing who we want to become. The spare room in Amara's house became Reaper's sanctuary during his recovery. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains each morning, casting gentle patterns on the worn wooden floor. His burns were healing slowly, and his lungs still ached from the smoke. But something else was healing too. Something deeper. Every morning, like clockwork, Caleb would pad down the hallway in his sock feet, carefully balancing a steaming cup of coffee. "Morning, Reaper," he'd say, setting the mug on the bedside table. Then he'd pull out his children's Bible, the pages already dog-eared from daily reading. "What's today's story?" Reaper would ask, his gruff voice softened by affection. Caleb would settle into the old armchair, reading tales of faith and redemption in his clear, young voice. Sometimes he'd pause to ask questions, and Reaper found himself seeing these ancient stories through new eyes. Amara would peek in before heading to her morning shift at the diner, her smile warm and reassuring. "You boys behaving?" she'd tease, and Reaper's heart would do a funny little skip that had nothing to do with his injuries. During the quiet afternoons, Reaper kept his hands busy. Despite his bandaged arm, he fixed loose doorknobs, squeaky hinges, and that stubborn kitchen drawer that always stuck. The simple work gave him purpose, and the house seemed to embrace his efforts, creaking less and standing a little straighter. When he finally ventured outside for the first time, leaning on the porch railing, what he saw stopped him in his tracks. A hand-painted banner hung across the church lawn. Veterans Garage Fund, Rebuilding Hope. People were unloading donated tools from pickup trucks, and Pastor Miller was directing volunteers with a clipboard in hand. That night, sitting at Amara's kitchen table, Reaper spread out paper and began to sketch. His hands, more used to wrenches than pencils, drew lines that became walls, doors, workbenches. A vision took shape, not just of a building, but of a future. "What if," he said quietly, as Amara set down a plate of cookies, "we made it more than just a garage? A place where guys like me, veterans, ex-cons, could learn skills, find work?" He looked up at her, hope and uncertainty warring in his eyes. Would you help me run it?" Amara's eyes lit up like stars on a clear night, and her smile was all the answer he needed before she even said, "Yes." The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and new beginnings as crowds gathered around the freshly painted building. The sign above the door gleamed in the morning sun. Brown and Briggs, Restoration, in bold, clean letters that seemed to promise hope itself. Sheriff Donnelly stood at the entrance, his weathered hands holding the ceremonial scissors. His usual stern expression had softened, and he nodded respectfully at Reaper before addressing the crowd. "This town's seen its share of changes," he said, "but none quite as remarkable as this." The scissors snipped through the red ribbon, and applause rippled through the gathering. Pastor Miller stepped forward, his Bible tucked under one arm, and raised his hands in blessing. "Lord," he prayed, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd, "make this place a sanctuary of second chances." Inside, the shop gleamed with donated tools hung in neat rows and workbenches built by volunteer hands. Through the open garage doors, curious townspeople wandered in, some who'd once crossed the street to avoid Reaper now shaking his hand. A group of children crowded around a corner where several repaired bicycles stood, their chrome polished to mirror shine. "My daddy says you fixed mine for free," a little girl said, beaming up at Reaper. He ducked his head, uncomfortable with praise but unable to hide his smile. Caleb darted through the crowd, clutching his prized drawing. "Look, Mom! Look, Reaper!" he called out. The motorcycle with angel wings, now professionally framed, found its place of honor on the office wall. Its childish lines somehow captured everything the shop stood for: redemption taking flight. As afternoon settled into evening and the dedication picnic wound down, Amara and Reaper found themselves beneath the sprawling oak tree. Its leaves had turned golden, drifting down around them like nature's own celebration. "I never thought I'd find home in a place I once wanted to burn down," Reaper said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. Amara turned to him, her eyes soft with understanding. Maybe it was never the place that needed changing. Their fingers met on the wooden bench between them, a touch as light as the falling leaves. Neither pulled away, letting the moment stretch like honey in the autumn light. The December evening wrapped the diner in a soft blanket of twilight, its Christmas lights twinkling like earthbound stars against the darkening sky. Amara Brown stood behind the counter, her hands moving automatically through the familiar motions of closing time as she hummed the same gospel tune that had sustained her through that fateful night months ago. The melody of Amazing Grace drifted through the empty diner, mingling with the gentle clink of coffee cups being put away. "Just like old times," she whispered to herself, but everything had changed. Where fear once lived, peace now resided. She pulled her coat tight and stepped into the crisp night air, her keys jingling as she locked the diner's front door. The first snowflakes of the evening began to fall, dancing in the glow of the street lamps. The soft whisper of winter was interrupted by the familiar rumble of a motorcycle engine. Amara turned to see Reaper pulling up, looking almost transformed in a crisp white shirt beneath his well-worn leather vest. Behind him, Caleb sat tall and proud, properly secured in his helmet, his eyes bright with excitement. "Need an escort home, ma'am?" Reaper's gruff voice carried a warmth that hadn't been there before. Caleb waved enthusiastically. "Mom, we brought the truck too, so we can all ride home together." Their laughter echoed through the frosty air as they made their way home, the snow growing steadier around them. Inside their warm house, boxes of Christmas decorations waited, and a small pine tree stood in the corner, filling the room with its fresh scent. "Can I put the star on top?" Caleb asked, carefully unwrapping ornaments. "Actually," Reaper said, reaching into his jacket, "I thought maybe this year—" He pulled out a simple wooden cross, hand-carved and polished to a soft glow. "Your grandpa taught me whittling back in the day." Amara's eyes welled with tears as she took the cross, running her fingers over its smooth surface. Together they decorated the tree, weaving lights and hanging ornaments while sharing stories and memories. Caleb insisted on hanging his favorite decorations at exactly the right spots, making them all laugh at his serious expression. Finally, the cross found its place at the top of the tree, a symbol of their journey together. They joined hands, Caleb between them, and bowed their heads in prayer, thanking God for second chances and newfound family. Later, Amara stood by the window, watching the snow fall in the quiet night. The neon sign of Teddy's Diner flickered in the distance, a reminder of where their story began. She felt Reaper's presence before his hand covered hers on the windowsill, his touch gentle and sure. Looking up at the man who had changed their lives, who had himself been changed, she whispered words that held all the gratitude in her heart. "Thank you." The words weren't just meant for him, but for the divine guidance that had led them here, to this moment of perfect peace. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.